All right. So my oldest brother, Edward, was 58 when he retired. He retired from the Gwinnett County Public Library. He was so excited about his retirement. And then shortly after after he retired, he started having some nausea and vomiting. And he was super afraid that it was going to be diabetes. Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So he was really afraid it was going to be diabetes. So he went to his doctor and they sent him immediately for an MRI. And then from the MRI, they sent him immediately to the hospital. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma, which is an incurable brain tumor. Okay? So they wished it had been diabetes. Right?
Yeah.
So it's all relative.
Yeah.
Anyway, at the time I was a practicing hospice nurse, and I knew more than I cared to know about that particular type of cancer. So I immediately took an advanced directive called the 5 Wishes, and I took that down to Atlanta to meet with him and his wife. I sat down with both of them and told them the truth as I saw it, based on my experience. I told them that outside of the miracle of God, which I certainly believe in, I believe that we serve a miracle-working God, okay? But this is not curable. I shared with him what my history had been like with this type of cancer and the course that it would likely take, okay? We openly discussed that this would be terminal. And what did him and Jan, my sister-in-law, want the rest of his life to look like? We talked about things that he wanted to do, like a bucket list, okay? We also talked about, did he want his pain controlled? To the point where he did not interact with family, okay? Because on my experience, there have been family members say, nope, nope, don't give him any pain medicine, because he's too groggy, okay? So I wanted that decision ahead of time with the two of them. We discussed the need to let him think about what treatments he wanted and what treatments he did not want. What were him and Jan willing to sacrifice in the process of reaching these goals? I shared with them that if he failed at this, he might possibly risk unnecessary suffering on a scale that's hard to imagine, all the while putting his family through a preventable ordeal of indecision and, most importantly, guilt. Okay? As humans, death and dying are often the last things we want to discuss and think about. So it was really important for me to ask my brother, who do you want making these decisions for you at this critical stage of your life? Do you want a set of strangers, or do you want to control your own care? Edward chose to control his own care. The doctors gave my brother 12 to 15 months. He lived 26 months. He chose the treatment he wanted, and he also chose the treatment he did not want. He saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. He saw his oldest daughter get married. He saw the birth of his first grandchild. And at the time when he left this earth, he was surrounded by family, and he was comfortable and peaceful. Many of us, in fact, tens of thousands of us, are on track to live into our 80s and beyond. Medical breakthroughs have led to rising longevity of human beings. In his groundbreaking book, Being Mortal, by Dr. Atul Gawande, he wrote, lacking a clear view of how people might live successfully all the way to their very end, we have allowed our fates to be controlled by medicine, technology, and strangers. The plain truth is we too often fail to have those difficult conversations about dying, okay? And this failure leads to incredible suffering, not only for us as patients, but for our families. We are failing to simply have a conversation that ensures that we direct our own destiny. We need to talk about dying. I recently walked through an end-of-life journey with a precious woman that I'm going to call Grandma. Although not my blood family, she very quickly became my family. She had an aggressive type of cancer, and unlike so many of my former patients, Grandma had a huge, and when I say huge, I mean a huge, extended, attentive family, with her 2 daughters leading the pack. Grandma had been going through chemo with hopes of having surgery after the tumor shrunk. But the chemo was chipping away at her life. Not only in how she felt, but in the time that she spent receiving it, going for lab work, going for fluids, and everything else that goes along with a diagnosis of this nature. I remember being in her home this early in January, and the decision was made to once again send her to the emergency room as a infection had invaded her immunocompromised body. I went to her room during that hospital stay, and I spent roughly 4 hours with her and her 2 daughters. We talked honestly about my experience with the disease and all the factors surrounding it, just based on my experience. I mapped out what the next few months might look like if she continued her treatment. And then I explained what it might look like if she decided to forgo any treatment. It always surprises me when people don't realize they have a choice. The doctor said, no offense. This was so incredibly hard for her daughters to hear. But the choice, however, was Grandma's. And she was totally capable of making that choice, making her own decisions. I explained what hospice is, and more importantly, what it is not. She had no idea. She assumed that you die as soon as you go on hospice, which unfortunately rings kind of true because people wait till the very last minute instead of taking advantage of this underutilized Medicare benefit. So, Grandma made the decision to forgo further treatment, and she agreed to hospice services that day. Not the right choice, not the wrong choice, but her choice that she made. What she and her family needed was for someone to sit down and explain things, something that's sorely lacking in the medical field today, taking the time to explain. This was so incredibly hard for her entire family to hear, as they felt their matriarch was giving up, when in fact she was choosing to leave this world on her own terms and in control. I will let Grandma's actual granddaughter share her perspective from a family member. She and I, before Meg speaks though, I wanted to tell you about the last day that Grandma was really responsive. It was just her and I at the house, and we were sitting on the bed. And she turned and looked at me, and she said, "I am so glad I made the decision that I made. It's been great." She left this home for her eternal home 2 days later, with both her daughters, 2 of her granddaughters, and me, all sitting on the bed, honestly singing softly and tenderly, "Jesus is Calling" by Carrie Underwood. It was one of the most perfect birthdays into eternal life I have had the honor to be a part of. Okay. This is Meg, her granddaughter.
Yes, can I sit?
Yeah.
Hey everyone.
Hi.
My Aunt Mare is here also. This is Grandma's daughter.
Unexpected.
Yes. So, when Mrs. Miller called me and asked me if I would be willing to share with you all, I felt convicted that I should, even in my heavy grief still, 7 months later since this all happened. It is a joy to get to tell all of you about my Grandma Rosie. And I appreciate you taking time to be here and listening. I have some notes here just so I don't get lost. I am the oldest of 7, so I am Rosemary's first granddaughter, and I will always be honored to be known as Rosemary's granddaughter. Grandma was mom to many. She had 2 daughters, but she took care of people her entire life. One of her greatest joys was making sure that everybody around her was fed. And she was always cooking and always making sure to share with her neighbors. There were so many wonderful things about her that I learned and that have shaped me into the wife and the mother that I am today. She literally helped raise me. She never missed anything. And my children sure love their Gigi, and they had a really special relationship with her. We have 3 children. Our son Zeke is 9, Lucy is 6, and our son Joshua is 4. And so I'm so thankful that they got to know her, and especially my 2 oldest will always have strong memories of her. And even today, as we were driving by Grandma's house, our son Joshua said, "Hi, Gigi." He knows where she lives, and he misses her too. Nearly 1 year ago, in October, Grandma was diagnosed suddenly with a shocking diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, which you never hear very good things about pancreatic cancer, right? She was so strong and it had endured so much over the years that I think this diagnosis took all of us by surprise. She truly was one of the bravest souls I've ever known. Despite the diagnosis, we were all committed to being a positive light in her life as she endured whatever it was that the Lord had for her. We sought multiple medical opinions and remained hopeful as the doctors felt that she was strong enough to handle treatment. However, we knew that this disease does have a devastating prognosis, even with treatment and surgery. I had this unshakable feeling deep inside of me that I knew this disease was likely going to take her to her eternal home. She decided, along with the support of family, to begin chemo right away, and we were prepared and told it would be extremely difficult. The hope was to do some chemotherapy and then eventually surgery that would hopefully extend her life up to 5 years. We all researched, sought advice, counsel, and just prayed about how to make her journey here as comfortable as possible. And she handled everything like a queen, as always. Grandma went above and beyond, and despite how awful she was feeling during treatment, she consistently raves about the kind care she would receive at the hospital from the nurses and from the doctors. We had the privilege of taking care of her for once, as she was always taking care of everyone around her. The side effects from the chemo were devastating, and watching her body fight and endure so much pain throughout the process literally took my breath away. When someone you love so deeply suffers, you also suffer. And after 3 brave rounds of treatment, her body was telling us it was too much. And up until this point, I think everyone was focused on just getting through treatment, hopefully getting to this surgery. However, she began to decline quickly and was admitted to the hospital. And like Mrs. Miller said during our time there, so many people checked in on us because she truly made such an impact. People were calling, and it was difficult to keep up with everyone and let them know how she was doing because she just was so special. Mrs. Miller walked with us through a very difficult season, but she compassionately stepped in and gave us the medical advice and her personal experience to help us be able to make decisions. And ultimately, Grandma was able to decide how she wanted her care to proceed moving forward. None of us really were familiar with hospice care, and like many had misconceptions about what that meant. We certainly weren't ready to lose her, but we also could not stand to see her continue to suffer. Grandma Rosie bravely made the choice to head home from the hospital under the care of hospice. And as we discussed this as a family, we were all simultaneously deeply saddened, but also immensely proud of her. She was choosing to live and enjoy each and every moment with her people. And over the next 2 months, we truly did soak up every minute that we had with her. My mom and aunt made sure that one of them was with her 24/7. They spent every single night with her, often not sleeping because they were concerned for their mama. The rest of us would visit daily. My children loved their Gigi deeply, and as a mom, it was both heartbreaking and beautiful to watch them interact with her during this time as she declined. Our focus shifted from her earthly healing to her heavenly transition. Whatever we could do to make her comfortable, we did. We listened to old music. We continued to watch all of her shows. She never missed any of her shows. She kept up with all her daily activities as much as she could. She just didn't want to miss a beat, and it was nice to try to keep a sense of normalcy during that time. Friends and family flew in to visit. She truly just loved being with her people, and we were so grateful that her brother was able to come visit, her nieces, her nephews, people that she just loved so dearly and had cared for her whole life, made the point to come to North Carolina and spend time with her. It truly was a gift that so many people cleared their schedules to visit with her every week. We laughed, we cried, shared memories, took photos, and just simply enjoyed and celebrated her life. The hospice caregivers were wonderful. She was always so happy to see each of them, except sometimes she would fuss about getting a shower because she didn't want anyone to mess with her hair. We learned how to help manage her pain, how to change her bandages, the proper medical terms for what was going on in her body. Mrs. Miller helped us focus on making her as comfortable and as calm as possible. And while I've always known I've had a passion for taking care of people, it really was a privilege to care for her and be able to take care of her for once. And when her body was telling us that she needed more time in bed, she still would insist that she put her face on every day. The company was coming, so she wanted to be ready.
Big earrings.
Oh, yes. Her circle of friends showed up weekly. Grandma Rosie was the glue to her card club, and those ladies continued to come and they played. So many people volunteered their time just to come and sit with her, and it really was such a testament to who she was and her life. And as her 82nd birthday approached and it was becoming increasingly clear that her time on earth was dwindling, my prayers soon shifted. And I was praying that the Lord would just allow her to celebrate that birthday with us, that we could have one final celebration as a family to honor her. Now, Grandma Rosie was the queen of cards. She never missed sending a birthday card, anniversary card, or a just because card, always with a little money in it. It was such a sweet thing about her. And she was overjoyed that week that she received about 120 birthday cards in the mail. A lot of that was to the effort of my sweet aunt, who always makes sure to think of others. And we wanted everybody to know that it was a special birthday for her. We celebrated big with family. People even flew in to be with her. Someone decorated her yard with balloons and signs. We took pictures with her. We ate birthday cake. And even though she wasn't able to have any cake, she looked around and I could just tell in her eyes that she was just so grateful to have everyone she loved in one place. And it really was a beautiful day. That day was March 3rd of 2022. And that night I hugged and kissed her goodnight and prepared to go out of town on a trip that had been planned for a while, and I really hesitated whether I should go or not, just knowing the state of her body here. We ended up deciding to go, and 2 days later, my sister called telling me that Grandma had become unresponsive. And this had happened once before when Aunt Mare was with her, and it was very scary. And both times Mrs. Miller came to help us. Mrs. Miller has a calming presence about her, and she was able to just help provide a sense of peace when it felt very chaotic and uncertain. And there was just something inside of me after that phone call that knew that it was time for her to transition home. My husband and I FaceTimed with Grandma from our cabin because I wasn't sure if I would make it home in time. And I wanted to make sure I took the opportunity to speak over her because I believed that she could hear me until the very last moment. We told her of how she would see Grandpa so soon and how many other people would be with her. We jumped in the car and drove home, and when I arrived, she was very peaceful. And from there, I had the privilege, along with my mom, my aunt, my sisters, and some close friends, to hold Grandma's hand to heaven for 3 days. We played all her favorite songs. We even knit some dishcloths because she loved to knit. She had started one right before She went unresponsive, and then my mom and aunt and I finished it while she was laying there, and it's framed at home. We kept that special one. We just talked with her, sang to her. It's hard to know what to say to someone who means so much in those final moments. You just hope that you have shown that person with your life how much they've meant to you. And while I could never repay her for all she's done, my hope and prayer is that I will continue to live her legacy as a wife and a mom and to care for others as deeply as she did. On March 8th, right at midnight, she passed away peacefully. And I smile because midnight was her favorite time of day. She loved all those late night shows, and when I was in college, I used to call her late, and she'd always be up. She was such a night owl, so it was just a perfect time for her. We told her over and over that it was okay and how much we loved her. And at 11:59, I looked at that clock, and we told her it was time to go home. Music was playing, and she briefly nodded yes, that it was time. And it was a beautiful moment. I believe in that moment that her soul was looking to Jesus and that she was being fully healed. And I knew immediately that her eyes were opened to the wholeness and healing in heaven. And I will never forget those moments. What an honor and privilege to always know that she is my grandma. And I will forever be loved by her. And I pray that I will be able to show others around me just how special she was by continuing her legacy. My mom and my aunt are two of the strongest women I know, and that's no surprise because they were raised by her. And I've just been so blessed to be surrounded by so many incredible women. It truly was such a privilege to be able to be with her in those final moments. While our grief is so heavy on most days, still, her presence is felt in my heart daily. It truly is my mission to keep her memory alive forever and always talk about how wonderful she was. She embodies strength and dignity, as my t-shirt says. And the hospice team allowed us to make sure we treated her this way up until the very moment that she passed into heaven. This year we have a lot of exciting family events. I've learned that grief and joy can simultaneously exist this year. And while there's a huge hole in our hearts that Grandma won't be here earthside for the birth of my sister's baby, Mrs. Miller's grandbaby, next month, or my other sister's wedding in March, her presence is so real, and I know that she's with us. We are so thankful to her entire medical team and for learning more about this process through her journey. And we feel it's really important to be educated in the services available to families who are facing a terminal diagnosis and preparing to transition to our eternal home.
So Hippocrates, he's the father of medicine. He clearly stated that physicians should refuse to treat those who are overpowered by their disease, realizing that in such cases, medicine is powerless. Medicine cannot cure everything. We weren't meant to live forever, at least not on this earth. The question I pose to you tonight is, would you really want to if you knew what forever looked like? Dr. Schisler and I, we have nothing to sell. We aren't here to make any money. We're not here to get you to buy anything. We gain nothing from being here tonight speaking. We are, however, passionate about this subject, and we want to share based on our experience and, more importantly for me, an eternal perspective. I know that you guys thought it was just going to be healthcare power of attorney and living will. That's not what it's going to be. We're going to go deeply into a lot of questions. Feel free to ask. We can start the slideshow, and then after we start that, if we go off into tangents, and that's totally fine, okay? This is Dr. Randy Schisler. He is the Palliative Care Regional Medical Director in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He attended the Ohio State University for both his undergrad and medical school. When completed, he did his internal medicine residency at Washington University in St. Louis. After residency, he completed a hospice and palliative medicine fellowship at the National Institute of Health and Capital Hospice. After that training, he took a position over a 450-bed hospital outside of Charlotte with Atrium Health. He expanded that into a multidisciplinary team and doubled inpatient encounters under his leadership. I had the privilege of serving under him during that time. He currently leads a busy multidisciplinary team of 10 advanced practice providers, nurses, LPNs, clinical social workers, doing over 2,500 consults a year in that hospital. So, this is Dr. Schisler.
As Marianne said, we're not going to be formal here. This is not supposed to be a formal presentation. It's titled A Conversation for a Reason. So you guys all came out here for a reason, and hopefully part of that was to learn, but I also imagine that there may be some questions that you came in with. While they're getting everything set up over there, does anybody, any brave soul, have a question they want to start the conversation with?
Are all hospice agencies in North Carolina under the same umbrella? Is it statewide? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is all hospice Walmart and they're kind of the same everywhere? No, actually every hospice, no, it's true. Hospices have a whole lot of different competitors. It's kind of like burger joints.
Okay.
You've got some chains, you've got some gigantic ones, you've got some ones across state lines. So there are some that are actually for-profit hospices.
Okay.
A lot of ethical issues around that, which I could spend a whole hour talking about, but I won't. But most of your local hospices are individually run. So
Okay.
Atrium runs a hospice, or Atrium has their own hospice, Nuvant has their own hospice.
Oh,
Those are
okay.
both different than the one out in Albemarle. So you have a lot of different groups that are doing the same thing, same format, same regulations, but they're all going to run under, but they're entirely separate groups with different leadership. So
If anybody wants the PowerPoints, if they can't see, I've got a bunch right here. So if you want to, yeah, just whoever needs that.
Yeah, so I actually tell people sometimes if they don't know what group to use, there's nothing wrong with interviewing more than one. You want somebody you're comfortable with. So if you talk to somebody and you don't get a great feel for them, you can say, hey, thanks for the info, we'll let you know. You can interview one of their competitors.
Okay.
And if there's something you didn't like in particular, you can tell their competitor, well, I talked to this other group, but I didn't like this one thing they said. How would you guys handle that? So sometimes you can kind of make sure that you get the group that's going to work best and going to align with what you're looking for.
Okay.
Did you mention there's some hospital for-profit? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So,
Any other burning questions right now before I go through a couple of things? So, a couple of objectives. We're going to talk about things like CPR, ACLS, what is life support, what does it mean to be a do not resuscitate. There's been a little bit of conversation around hospice already, but we do a little bit of talking around hospice and palliative. And then some considerations around food and nutrition, especially at end of life where people get real sick. So, terminology is not the most fun way to start a conversation. Next slide. But medical people and the general public sometimes use the exact same word in different ways. And so sometimes I say something and the patient says something and we think we're all on the same
a little
page.
bit louder.
But we're actually not. We're using the same word, but in some different ways. So I want to make sure that if we're talking about some really important stuff here, we're all starting from the same understanding of what do these things actually mean. So anybody in here CPR certified or have been? Yeah. So CPR is pushing on the chest, breathe, and mouth to mouth. It's just the basics, and that's people do that in the hospital, but also in bystanders. People learn CPR all over the place. ACLS is CPR plus some of the more advanced medical stuff. The drugs, the shocks, the defibrillators, that kind of stuff. So that's all the things we can do to restart somebody's heart if it's shut down on us. So that's all the cardiac resuscitation side. Life support is putting a tube down somebody's throat and into their lungs and attaching it to a breathing machine. So that's the respiratory side of life support. And then you can also use IV medicines that constantly go in to hold the blood pressure up. Most people with blood pressure problems, it's too high, we're trying to bring it down. But as you get real sick, it's the opposite. It bottoms out and you need to hold it up to give the organs enough blood, enough oxygen, the things they need. Also sometimes to support heart rate. Sometimes as the heart gets sick, it struggles to even go fast enough. And so the combination of the medicines to support the heart and the breathing machine is what we're talking about when we say life support. Things like oxygen, IV fluids, antibiotics, those treatments can be used on their own. They can be used with life support. They can save lives, but none of those things are actually life support. Just the machine and just those certain medications, when we're talking about life support, is what we're going to be using. Next slide. So if that's resuscitation, what does it mean to be a do not resuscitate? Well, it just means we're not going to resuscitate if things get to that point. So the key here is that if your heart hasn't stopped or your breathing hasn't stopped, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't factor into our thinking whatsoever unless we're at a point where we're needing those sort of really advanced interventions. And if you are do not resuscitate, we would not do those invasive measures. We would just use medicines to keep somebody comfortable and let them go. But let's say she gets sick and she goes into the hospital. I get sick and I go into the hospital. She's full code and I'm DNR.
But I'm not, I just want to,
We'll reverse that.
I have a most form. I'm healthy, I'm almost 65, but I'm a do not resuscitate. That doesn't mean not to treat,
Yeah.
because if I needed to go to the hospital, I would, if I needed, but if you find me and I'm not breathing, and all you church members, and I'm not breathing and my heart's not beating, I want to go see Jesus.
Yeah.
Do not bring me back. So,
We'll go the other direction. I'm full code. So we'll go the other direction. But let's say we both end up in the same hospital same day with pneumonia. We get admitted to the medical floor. We get fluids, we get antibiotics, a week home, we're going home. Nobody in the hospital would have ever considered whether or not she was DNR and I was full code. It doesn't matter. That is a line in the sand. And if you're not approaching that line, then it's just something that we know in case of, but it doesn't affect anything that we're doing on our day-to-day basis. We got a question?
Speak up.
Yeah,
Hear
you
you.
can bring me a microphone. Yeah,
there's not speakers in here, right?
I'll try to. Yeah, I appreciate that. Just keep an eye on me if I get quiet again.
I was going to have one out there, but
And I'll say,
Louder.
in my day-to-day life, I often am having difficult conversations and often tone of voice is a little bit lighter. So you may need to keep me honest and be loud. So I think 30 years ago, DNR meant comfort care. It meant actively dying. And just like a lot of things 30 years ago, that ain't true today. But we still have that history. So in the here and now, DNR, this is how it's considered. And so we have people that are DNR that are getting full aggressive treatment. I see people every day that are DNR and getting chemotherapy, getting surgeries. Because their heart never shut down, we don't need to consider it. They can be as aggressive as they want outside of that one decision. It's just that line in the sand where they've said, I don't want to put my body through that for whatever reason that they've decided that that's the right call. You can be I don't want CPR, but I would be able to go on a life support machine for a short amount of time. And so some people say, look, if my heart goes, I don't like my chances of getting back. But if the heart never stops, just your breathing does, the chances of coming out the other side are actually better. So you can do it that way. And I've had some people that have had like bad asthma. You go on the breathing machine, 24 hours later, you're off and you're home the next day. So, when you've got certain conditions, this can make an awful lot of sense. What you can't do is flip it the other way. So I have people on a weekly basis tell me, I don't ever want to be on a life support machine, but if my heart stops, I'd like you to try to bring me back. And it makes sense to say, that there's certain things I'd be okay with and not. But the key with CPR and life support is it doesn't fix anything. We're trying to restart the heart because if we can't, we have to declare somebody dead. That's nothing more we can do if we can't get the heart back. We put them on life support to support the breathing, but those things are just buying time to say, what happened? What went so wrong in the body that the heart stopped or they stopped breathing? And give us time to fix it. Did they have a heart attack? Is it a pneumonia? We gotta find some way to support the body why we fix the problem. So if you restart the heart, but you don't support the body, you didn't fix any sort of problem. And so the body just shuts down again in the very near future. We've done research on this, and people that want CPR but no life support don't leave the hospital alive any more often than people are that don't want CPR and don't want life support. So it doesn't work. And so if that is something where somebody tells me that, we have to have a conversation and say, and either need to go all in for a little while, or we need to be all the way out, but unfortunately that middle of the road just doesn't work. So this one is titled Not As Seen on TV. So if the medical shows, the movies, we've all seen that. They've actually did a really interesting study that made New England Journal of Medicine where they watched a lot of TV and they said, in shows and movies, how likely is it that somebody survives CPR? Answer was about 75%. And not only did they survive, there's a lot of this where 30 seconds later they're back on their feet, running around, shooting guns, kissing their co-star. They are back to 100% in 30 seconds. They've done studies where they've just surveyed people and said, how likely do you think it is, if you need a CPR, that somebody might make it out of the hospital, might be able to survive that? And people think it's about 75%. Don't know whether or not it's because that's on TV and it's unconsciously biased them, or if that's just kind of what people think. But those actually correlate fairly well. Unfortunately, the reality is a lot different. When we're talking about these heroic measures, we call them heroic measures for a reason. And it's because something has gone so wrong, the body has shut down entirely. And we're trying to do the most aggressive, most intense things that mankind knows how to either bring them back from the edge or bring them truly back to life. So no matter what happened, these are gigantic events, and it's not a time where just a little bit of something's going to work. We have to go all in. And even when we go all in, the deck is stacked against us from the beginning. So if somebody's at home and their heart quits on them, despite everything we know how to do, about 1 in 30 leave the hospital alive. Now if you're in the hospital, you got the monitoring, you got the staff right there that knows everything to do, they got all of the drugs, things go a lot better. 50% of the time, half the time, we can get somebody's heart back. But still only 1 out of 6 people that has a cardiac arrest in the hospital gets out of the hospital alive. So sometimes we can get them back early, but the odds of actually getting them out of the hospital was somewhere at 15-20% depending on where you look. So it's not zero by any stretch, but it's always a big event, and we know that unfortunately the deck is stacked against most people from the beginning. From a respiratory standpoint, we talked about this on the last slide, but if your heart never stops, but your breathing does, about half the time we can get somebody off of life support and out of the hospital alive. So odds are a whole lot better if the heart never stops versus if something ever goes wrong enough that the heart does. So this is another major misconception that I think TV and shows like that unintentionally bias people a little on. It's not nearly so easy as either you try it and it works and I get all better, or you try it and it doesn't work and I go. What we know is for the people that survive, this is still a big event. It still took a lot of toll on their body. And so even for the people that survive, most of them never get back truly to 100%. Now some people come pretty close, but on autopsy studies, about 50% are found to have had brain damage caused by CPR. And we can actually do cognitive studies and put people through tests and realize that people that survive CPR, their brain function isn't the same as the average population in the same age group. When you do CPR, you're trying to pump blood, but you can't do it nearly as well as the heart working itself. So you get some blood around, but it's not the same, and so you just don't feed organs quite as much. The brain makes up about 3% of your body weight, but gets about 20% of oxygen and energy from the blood. So it needs the most, which also means it starves the quickest. So if you're not getting good blood flow around, the brain's what's going to feel it first. Physical function also is likely to decline, especially in the short term. This is something that coming out, most people are going to need rehab, but even long term, They've done studies a year out from CPR, and it was a much higher chance that somebody was going to live requiring significantly more support than A, they did before they had that event, and B, versus people in the same age group with the same kind of medical conditions. So this is not a what doesn't kill you make you stronger. This is that if you do rally through, there's still a price to pay. And plenty of people survive this with only mild cognitive brain function, and over time are able to recover function, and will look back and say, this was totally worth it. But there are those that don't do nearly that long, unfortunately. Age plus 10 is a rough guide for how likely we are to break ribs. Again, you got to push really hard to pump blood. You kind of got to pin the heart between the spine and the sternum. And so when you're pushing that deep, when you get older, your bones don't flex as much. They get a little more brittle, so they're less likely to bend and more likely to break. So that's one of the consequences that sometimes we deal with, and something that can unfortunately cause significant discomfort while we're trying to do things in order to save somebody's life. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to address that because my son's an EMT, and he talked about there was an elderly lady who had cancer, and she was having cardiac arrest, and when they got there, they asked the family, because the family said she has cancer, and he said, "Are you sure you want us?" And they had to, because they said, "You've got to, bring her back," and they did. And he said, "We broke ribs," and he said, "Now she's alive and has to suffer broken ribs and still has to die."
Yeah.
And so he was furious because he said, "I don't think that's what she would have wanted." So that's why this is important, because you need to make it known what you want.
The conversation, and I've said this from the very beginning, the conversation is the most important thing that you can have. My healthcare power of attorney, you don't need a lawyer, we'll get into that. You don't need a lawyer to do a living will. You don't need a lawyer to do a healthcare power of attorney, okay? I can do them tonight for you if you want. You need a notary and 2 witnesses that aren't related, okay? Healthcare power of attorney is probably the most important out of both of those, because you want to name somebody that is going to honor your wishes. My husband and my 3 adult sons are not my healthcare power of attorney, because when the rubber hits the road, the emotion's going to be too high. And by golly, I don't want to come back. My youngest son, somebody asked him, "You know what your mom wants?" He said, "Yeah, if she breaks her leg, we're supposed to shoot her like a horse." Honestly, Sam, true. Yeah, I know where I'm going. So I speak from an eternal perspective. But the living will, I have had family members, and Randy can attest, Dr. Schisler can attest to this,
Randy's fine.
that the loudest family member in the room, when somebody can't talk for themselves and they haven't made these plans and haven't shared what they want, the loudest family member can get them to do CPR, to do whatever. Keep my mama alive. We've heard that. Keep my mama alive. It is.
It is awful.
If you're taking care of them as a nurse, it is awful. That's why I left ICU.
Well, I'll say it's awful if that's not what they would have wanted.
Yeah.
And that's my big thing.
Not a right choice, not a wrong choice.
But
you need to know.
I went into this field because I'm a firm believer in informed consent. And I don't believe that a lot of time in medicine, even when signing people up for surgeries and chemo, that we really give people enough information so that they can make an informed decision. If somebody wants all of that and they know going into it that I'm likely to break a lot of their ribs and they still say give it a shot, I got no problem with that. I think what you mentioned is that the concern there is that I'm not sure that's what they would have wanted. Or there's some signs that this, that they've even said some of those things, but we don't have them in writing, and in the middle of a crisis the family couldn't make that decision. And we do have a lot of staff where it's like, I feel like that you're doing bad to somebody, not really helping them.
Explain the age plus 10 again, I didn't follow.
So the chance that if you need CPR, you break someone's rib, is how old they are plus about 10%.
That's the percent.
That's the percent chance that you break a rib with CPR.
So if you're 60, you're 70% chance you're going to break
roughly. So again, younger you are, the more flexible your bones are, the less likely it is.
And they break. I mean, you push hard.
Yep. So, and again, it's a rough guideline, but it puts you in the ballpark. So we never know. There have been 105-year-olds that have survived CPR, right? And there are 18-year-olds that crash for no reason that we can't get back. So we never know who's going to come out the other side and who's not. We do know there are some things that make it more or less likely. So things that make it less likely that you're going to be able to survive, it comes down a lot. The whole category up top really comes down to how much physical strength reserve do you have to tap into. So if just getting around during the day, trying to do the daily activities, getting yourself dressed, getting yourself to and from the restroom, if those kind of things are really hard on you, the chance that you have the physical reserve to rally through something this intense is not as good. It's not a zero, but it's just not as good as somebody who's got more physical reserve there. If you've got a bad cancer or another major end-stage organ, heart failure, lungs, you got something that's really bad, you've already got something that's almost like your body dragging around an anchor. It's a constant toll on the system. And so if you've already got something that's pulling your strength down, again, it's less likely that you're going to have the strength to be able to rally through something this significant. The 3 medical problems is kind of the same. If you have 1 giant one or 3 medium ones, you can kind of add up to the same thing. So if you've got a number of medical problems, and this is not tiny medical problems, these are major organs that are having a little bit of trouble. And then the last one there, and this is where I get the most questions, so I'll talk about that a little bit, but age over 75. Now, I've gotten accused of saying that and it being an ageist thing. We know not all people over 75 are the same. We also, I think we can agree that the average 75-year-old is not as strong as the average 30-year-old, right? So it's not ageism, it's just reality that as the body gets older, that every organ and everything you got just doesn't work as quite as well as it did a couple decades ago. And then when put under a whole lot of stress, the one that's older and has been through more is more likely to fall apart. The one that's younger, hasn't been through as much, is more likely to be able to hold up. So it's not a guarantee, but again, it's just, these are all things that statistically decrease the chances.
You haven't seen my exercise class.
Yeah.
They rock.
So the bottom part of that is the things that make it more likely. So your best chance is, if you crash, for somebody to be right there, have seen you when you crash, and start something immediately. So if that's at home, if that's even we're in the hospital, being able to start interventions immediately is going to be somebody's best chance to be able to pull through. And if whatever caused the body to shut down like that is something reversible. So if you have really bad heart failure and your heart finally gives out, we might be able to get it back with CPR, and we might be able to support you with a life support machine for a while, but we can't fix the problem. You have an end-stage heart, and it's worse now than it's ever been. So even if we stabilize things for a while, we don't have anything fixable to go after, and that's probably not somebody that we can get better. Versus if you had a pneumonia. We can stabilize you long enough to get you some antibiotics, and by a few days, we should be able to get that turned around and get somebody better the vast majority of the time. So if there's a reversible problem, something that we've got easy things that we can treat, that's the person that's most likely that we're going to be able to get better. So here are some of the big questions. Because nobody wants resuscitation, right? CPR is not fun. Being on a life support machine is not a good time. What people want is an outcome. You want to get better. You want to go back home and be with your family. You have certain things in mind. So even though you don't want CPR, it's kind of like a surgery. You don't want surgery either, but you want your knee to feel better. So you're willing to do something and go through some discomfort in order for a chance to live better or to come out the other side. So if you go through it and a month or two down the road, you're back to 95%, you look back and say, geez, yeah, that was, I'm glad I did that. If you're one of the unlucky ones and you go through it and you never make it back to 20%, you never make it back home at all, that's where some people might say, not sure that was the right call. Statistically, we can tell you your odds a little bit, but we never know what's going to happen. And so each of us, as an individual, has to look at this and say, what chance am I willing to take? How much are you willing to go through for a chance to come out the other side and probably live at least a little bit sicker than you are right now? Chance of doing worse, chance of being better, but on average, maybe just a little bit down. What's quality of life with you? What do you need to be able to do to be happy? What would you not be happy with? And when looking at this, one of the things I always think about is what's your quality of life right now? Because when I do this in the hospital, and if I have somebody tell me their quality of life ain't great, and they're really not happy with where they are, but they're still full code, we have a conversation about it and say, your quality of life after something like that's only going to be down. So if you're really not happy with where you are right now, it could make sense to set some hard limits. And some people say, absolutely, you're right. And some people say, you know what, maybe my quality of life wasn't so bad right now, because I do still think I'd want that shot. But it's something to think about. And then the other thing is what do you want those last moments to look like? We've heard a great story about a beautiful last period of times. And that's somebody who chose to be at home and be with their family, and hopefully that is exactly how she wanted it. But if you want your last moments to look like that, you can't still be full code. Because if you're having your last moments at home and your family's around you and you're peaceful, but you're full code, what your family should do is call 911 and start CPR. And so they're going to do all those aggressive things to go that direction. So the really aggressive stuff in the hospital and being at home with family are on opposite ends of the spectrum. And so that's where you kind of have to decide to say, I'd like to be at home, but I really want that shot. It's one of those where it's a can't have your cake and eat it too type of moments. You kind of have to decide which of those two is the more important to you. So I'm going to pause there. I will explain this picture because it's a transition to our next one. I'm going to pause there. You said covered several things there, but what questions or what thoughts do you guys have right now?
How serious is AFib?
In the bigger scheme of things, on par with hypertension and diabetes. It's by far the most common heart rhythm problem. You got to be on blood thinners for it because basically the top part of the heart, instead of squeezing, just kind of jiggles. And so you can run your heart rate too fast, so you might have to be on meds for that. But you can also form blood clots in the heart, which if they stay there, actually don't cause that much of a problem. But every heartbeat, there's the risk of that clot breaking off and going somewhere else. So one of the most common reasons people have strokes is from AFib. So definitely has some long-term consequences, but controlling heart rate and a little bit of a blood thinner is so commonplace now. It's one of those things that is not nowhere near the spectrum of like heart failure or some of the other things that I can think of.
Question for both of you. In your experience, how often, say some ballpark percentage, people not advocating for themselves, even though you have conversations and you try to educate people, how often do you find that people just don't advocate for themselves?
Now, on my experience, the majority don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, the majority, we don't think about it. We just don't,
You don't want to.
I mean, I asked a group of physicians, what is the mortality rate for Mecklenburg County? And some of them sat there and went, and I was like, 100%, I mean, we're all gonna die. I mean, these are highly trained physicians, and they're like,
That was a trick question.
it was a trick question, but I mean, that's how we just don't think about it. And the default in our medical system is everything. You're gonna get everything unless you know what it's about. I mean, that is like my soapbox. I've been on this soapbox now for 20 years. There's no right choice or wrong choice, but know all the information and then make the choice. Because the majority of people do want to be home with their family when they leave, not in the hospital, in ICU, on machines, but the majority of the people don't. They don't want to talk about it. Blah, 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 blah. My daughter knows, my parents know, you know what I'm saying? So,
Well, we have people that say, I don't really want that, but my daughter really does, and so I'll do it for somebody else. So some of those really loud voices will sometimes have some of those softer personalities say, you know what, I don't want her to always look back and wonder, like, well, what if they would have tried? So I'm willing to go through some pain and suffering and something I really don't want because they see it as a loving gesture for somebody else.
And that's not fair. That's my opinion. but-
that is my opinion as well. That's selfish, and I understand that, because you love your daughter, you love your son, but given the information laid out, okay, it's their decision, if they're in their right mind. And that's where your healthcare power of attorney, your medical healthcare power of attorney comes into play. If you get, the reason that we have healthcare power of attorneys is from 4 women in their 20s. Karen Ann Quinlan, some of you may remember her, Terry Schiavo, those are the reasons that we have them, because they became what people call vegetable or vegetative state, and the families made the decisions. And there was a lot of legal and court battles, and so that's why we have this, and that's why it was important for me as one of the first things as your faith community nurse is to tell you, have this paperwork, have the conversation. That's the important thing.
If you have the DNR, can your family go against it, or your health power of attorney? Because I know that when my husband died, when we prepared his health power of attorney for me, it stated that I could not go against his DNR.
Yeah. So,
Well, I was just gonna, again, what I have seen, yes, but if the person that is a DNR, okay, can't make that decision, is unresponsive, I have seen family members revoke it. And the doctors, because it's such a litigious society,
Exactly.
they're so afraid. And so that's why my husband and my 3 sons are not my healthcare power of attorney.
Even if it states on the health power of attorney?
it depends on which form you have, so that's the other thing.
This
So,
was from Atrium.
a healthcare power of attorney and a living will, the living will especially, no matter how strongly it's worded, is still legally treated as a suggestion, not a rule.
And that you have a healthcare power of attorney and a living will in your packets for the North Carolina simplified form.
So
How do
there
you
are-
go about getting a DNR?
Yeah, so there are 2 forms in the state. There's a most form, and I didn't put a copy in here, but it's bright pink. And
I have one in my office. I have a most form for me
And you can
personally.
Google it. You can see them online. But there's also what they call a goldenrod DNR. It just says DNR across the top. Doctors' offices have those. Those are medical orders and carry a lot more weight. And if somebody has one of those, it's a lot harder for family to change their mind. Legally, family cannot change that decision. Functionally, a lot of doctors will back down to family because they're saying, you know what, the family's going to sue if I don't do this, and so they do it. So now, some have, and I've been in that position where I've told families, I'm sorry, but I've had, and I'm lucky because I was the person that had the conversation with them and did the form with them. I knew exactly what they wanted. Family, all they have to do is lie to the doctor. If they say, I had a conversation with them after this form was done and they changed their mind. You have, even then, even if I had a conversation with that person before, if somebody tells you that, you kind of have to go and believe them, even if you have your concerns. So all they have to do is say, they changed their mind, we just didn't get rid of the form yet, and we'll do everything. Which is why it's so important that the person that we're speaking with is somebody that you've appointed and that you trust to be able to follow that. I'm the healthcare
Stand up to other family members.
I'm the healthcare power of attorney for 10 people. 5 of them are not family members. So, because
It
again,
doesn't have to be a family
doesn't have to be a family member. I'm the HCPOA for both of my in-laws because I'm medical and they know that I've seen this stuff and they know that I won't be as emotional as the core family, and they've talked to me about what they want. So they think I understand the medical stuff. I'm not going to be the one that's going to be like, you got to do everything here. I'm going to be a little bit more objective. So, picking the right person is really, really important so that you don't have somebody trying to reverse that. The key is that the physician should only be listening to the healthcare power of attorney, not all of the extended family. We got one go-to speaker, and the final decision needs to come from that person. So if that person says we're sticking with this, then we're sticking with it.
It gets really muddy, and that's why the conversation is so key. And naming that to me is probably the most important form, is the healthcare power of attorney and then having that conversation with that person. I mean, my most form is, and we'll probably talk about that a little more, mine is a do not resuscitate. Again, if you find me not breathing or my heart not beating,
Don't
go to
break
the
your
light,
ribs.
man, I'm ready to go see Jesus. But if I'm sick, I want you to take me to the hospital, you know, if I have pneumonia, if I have, you know, give me IV fluids, give me whatever, you know. But if you see me not breathing with heart not beating, I'm out of here. You're gonna have to find a new nurse.
You got a gentleman behind you, gonna stand up first, he beat you to the punch.
Okay.
That's okay. You probably said it, but I didn't catch it. If you have a health care power of attorney, and they say this person is not to be resuscitated, okay, or not to be intubated.
Yeah.
But a family member says, I don't care what that piece of paper says, I want it.
Right.
How are you as a doctor supposed to respond?
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. It depends on which form you're having. So if you have a healthcare power of attorney form, they're going to listen to the healthcare power of attorney. You need a stronger form than a living will or a healthcare power of attorney to really be able to not listen. So I've done a most form. It's the most customizable that says, do not allow family to overturn this decision. Because I've had family that said, I have a healthcare power of attorney, but even them, I'm really not sure if when push comes to shove, they're going to be able to stick with this decision. So that's where, if you have concerns, the first thing to do, I think, is have the conversation with as many people as possible. Tell them you will come back and haunt them, or you will forever be upset if they disrespect your wishes, right? To say, if you love me, you will follow what I want for me, not what you want for you, right? What I want for me, not what you know. When they're sick, they can choose whatever they want, but me, this is what I want, and if you love me, you'll follow this. And if you have that conversation with somebody, is going to make it much harder for them to reverse it if they've heard that directly from you versus they've heard it third or fourth hand, and they wonder, is that really what they meant, or were they confused that day, just, you know, were they sick, you know?
When they're in the hospital, I mean, in an acute situation, that is the hardest time to make decisions. I mean, and that's when, as a palliative team in the inpatient, when we're brought in a crisis, you know, and we have a lot of work cut out for us, you know, in that situation.
So the generic forms are easier to override than some of the stronger doctor phone outlets. So if you have any concerns, sit down with one of your doctors, go through what the forms are, and if nothing else, there is home palliative and clinic-based palliative in most communities. If for nothing else, you can get in to see them sometimes just to help with these forms. You were next if you sort of question.
Go ahead, it was similar.
Okay.
Well,
So
what I was going to say is, I wanted a DNR. I wanted the most form for me. And again, I'm going to be 65 next month. Okay, healthy, right? I couldn't get a doctor to fill it out for me. I mean, I finally found one that said, well, it's your choice. I said, exactly, it's my choice. You know, I mean, literally, they would not. They were like, no, I'm not filling that out for you.
Wow.
Gosh, I've done that before my doctor retired. Of 30 years.
So anyway, and so if you need a doctor that'll do it, I've got one.
I'll do that.
He'll do it.
No, I really in the hospital, I have, when talking to a sick patient, I've had actually a couple other family members there and done them for all of them while we were there together. I've done like 3 or 4, not all that said the same thing, but we went ahead and did them all with the family that was there. Because you're right, sometimes, especially if they don't feel like they know you real well, some doctors, they're human. Some of them are going to be more comfortable with this stuff than others.
Yeah, a lot of doctors don't like to have this conversation. A lot.
It's critical to have that goldenrod or the most form with you if you go to the hospital and come back home, because if you are a DNR and you do not have that on your refrigerator or at home, they're going to resuscitate you when EMS gets there.
Yeah.
They don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So you
I almost
have
said something about that earlier. So you said somebody said that EMS were called and they asked the family, do they want to do CPR? Technically, EMS is not supposed to listen to family, no matter what they say, no matter what form, even if they have a healthcare power of attorney and a living will and they hand it to EMS. because those are medical documents that are supposed to be interpreted by a medical provider, a physician. So EMS, now they don't always do this because they're human and they're trying to do the right thing. But the law says, regardless of what family says, if you don't have a Mohs form or a goldenrod, they're supposed to start CPR, get you to the hospital, hand the doctor the forms, and then the doctor can say, call it. Or, can stop things then. But without the Mohs form of the goldenrod, EMS is supposed to do it every time. Real world, again, there's the theory and then there's the real world. The real world is they're going to try to do the right thing for the patient, and so if they've got somebody saying right there, I'm the healthcare power of attorney and they didn't want this, most EMS are going to try to listen to that. But you could have a stickler.
Good.
So the next topic is food and nutrition at end of life. And so we got a couple of really powerful words that come up. So things like dehydration and starvation, right? You think of people that desperately want, you think of something like this. They want water, they want food, they're desperately trying to get to it, and there's a reason why they can't. So I'm going to try to diffuse just a little bit of the language there. So dehydration just means the body doesn't have enough fluid to work right. We are mostly water, and so without water, we will start to shut down and eventually we will pass away. So this can lead to death. It may surprise some of you, although some of you might know, but dehydration is largely considered one of the more comfortable ways to die. Because the only real symptom is dry mouth. And you can treat dry mouth really easily, the sponges on a stick and some ice chips, and there's some really simple things that we can do for that. The other thing is that for all of human history, but before about 100 years ago, there were no IV fluids. There was no way to get somebody fluid as they got sick, and so unless you died suddenly, you went down a slower path, you were going to die with some degree of dehydration because there was no other option once the body shut down to the point where it couldn't get stuff in. So we are made to ease our own passing because everybody knows we were designed to die from the moment we were born, right? With this part of the package. And so we have built-in mechanisms to help ease our own passing. So the body knows if it doesn't get water in 24, 48 hours, this is not good. And so it'll start producing natural endorphins, natural things to ease symptoms. And so as the body goes through the process to make that more comfortable and help the body not suffer along the way.
Can you hear me?
No.
Okay.
So that's on the dehydration side. Starvation, and I'll tell a quick story here, but I was an intern at Barnes. First couple of weeks out there, had to call, I was on night shift, because that's where I started my internship on, and had to call security twice in 3 nights for family and patient fighting to the point where it was disturbing everybody around me. And so after the second time, we got family out, I sat down and was like, what is going on here? Because I'm night shift. I don't know this guy necessarily. I'm just trying to go and try to help manage on cross cover a crisis. And we sat down, and basically this was all around food. He had an advanced cancer, pancreatic. He couldn't eat very much. And his family thought it was a hospital food. So then they started bringing in stuff. They brought his favorites. They got his favorite stuff from everywhere around. All the restaurants he liked to go to. They brought him desserts. They brought him, anything that they thought that he's always liked. And he wouldn't really eat, or he'd take a bite or two and say, yeah, I'm done. And it blew up because they saw this day after day and they got very frustrated. And so I talked to him, I'm like, why aren't you eating? And he said, Doc, you ever had a really bad flu? Yeah, I've been sick with the flu before. He's like, okay, so think you got a flu and your mom brings you in the biggest, juiciest cheeseburger from your favorite place. You gonna wolf that down? No, I got the flu. I might not even be able to do butter and toast. I don't think the cheeseburger is going to go very well. It's like, you think I'm sicker than you were when you had the flu? I feel worse every day than you probably ever felt in your life. Got it, right? It's a great point. So what he said was, I'm trying. I'm trying to eat. My body just is telling me no. So I'm either not hungry at all, and I take a bite or two to please them, or I'm a little bit hungry, I take 2 bites, I'm full. And if I keep eating, it makes me sick. So I can't keep pushing it, or I can only push it so far before I stop, and then when I do, they get mad. So that was a really powerful story for me, and what he said matches up perfectly with the research. And that is, when people get this sick, they tend not to be hungry. And so we have to kind of rethink food and nutrition as the body starts to transition, because it's not in the same place it used to be. The rules are different. And so we have to start looking at things through a slightly different lens as the body transitions, or we can end up, that family really wanted to care for him, and what they were doing was causing gigantic fights and really upsetting him when he was really sick, and that's not the support that he needed.
For families, food is love.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, that's one of my points on this slide. So,
Sorry.
No, that's good. So, if somebody gets to the point where they're not eating and drinking, we often hear about, a couple of things we can do to try with that. IV fluids. I use them pretty much every day. We're in the hospital. They are great. However, at end of life, they've got their own set of downsides. So, interestingly, they don't help thirst, because thirst starts here, and no matter how much fluid you give here, you still haven't eaten or drank anything, so you're still thirsty. So you still have to do all the same mouth care that you would do on IV fluids or off of it. But when the body starts to shut down, part of pushing away fluids and food is because the body knows that's not what it needs right now. And trying to do this artificial stuff to get around the body's natural mechanisms sometimes causes more downside than upside. So when you do give them a bunch of fluid, their body can't process it, and it starts leaking places. So you get people whose legs swell up like this, and then they start having weeping open wounds. You get it going into where it's causing a lot of secretions, and now they're coughing and gagging and having that rattly breathing, or it goes into their lungs and causes their oxygen to drop or shortness of breath. So the fluid doesn't always stay where you want it and doing good. It can actually end up causing more problems. TPN is IV nutrition. It basically is just, along with fluid, you get proteins and fats and that kind of stuff. It's the same process. It's still, you're given a lot of fluids through an IV. It can go the wrong place, so you have the same downsides. What about feeding tube? Either through the nose or in the belly. If you can't eat, you put a feeding tube in. It makes perfect sense. It doesn't really work quite that easily, unfortunately. When somebody gets sick, the GI tract is the first thing to shut down. That's one of the reasons that even for a short-term illness, you're not hungry, because the body knows you can go a few days without eating and drinking, and so it shuts down the GI tract to push all those resources to the other organs that need more during that illness. So if you do give them a bunch of stuff through feeding tube, their stomach and intestines aren't processing it very well, so it's most likely to either come back up or run all the way through, but it's not going to be absorbed. So you can give them food, you can give them all the calories in theory that they need, but the body's not actually going to absorb and be able to use any of it. And so when we get to this point, our recommendation, and actually the recommendation of a couple of societies, is careful hand feeding. Give them things they like as often as they want it, offer it a bunch, but also follow their lead, and when they say no, or they take 2 bites and they say they're full, understand that's where their body is. That's not them giving up. That's not them refusing. That's their body telling you, this is not what I need right now, or this is all I can take right now.
With all these downsides, how do you hear people living on feed tubes for years and years?
So the reason is because what we're talking about here is these things at end of life. So and actually there's a little bit more on the next slide. One let's put at the bottom, we'll actually go to that. So aspiration, if you are feeding somebody, just be very careful. If you give them too much and it goes down the wrong way, that's where food can show love, can turn into doing something to somebody that actually hurts them or shortens their time with us. So go to the next slide, because I answered this a little bit there. We got some really good research that for a number of medical problems, the feeding tubes can extend life years to decades and improve quality of life. So if you had a stroke and you can't swallow, but we can get past that, those people are more likely to be alive in a couple of years, and actually are more likely to regain their strength and regain their function. So if you've had a big stroke and the swallowing muscles are paralyzed, but you can feed them through that long enough for this to come back online, those people can do great. If you've got a cancer or something going on in the chest where you strictly can't get food down, you can bypass that. Then people can do great. So those things are, part of it is, all these things are tools, right? All these things have their up and their downside, so it's the right tool at the right time. So you just had a stroke, some of these things can be the perfectly right tool. If your body is shutting down from end-stage cancer, that's where these same things are not the right tool for the right time. So with that, feeding tubes, while they clearly have places that they can help, they've also got some places where we found that they think that logically it kind of makes sense that they can help, but we found that they don't. So there's advanced dementia and something called failure to thrive. It used to be a childhood diagnosis, but they've moved it to adults now. About 300-400 years ago, they called it the dwindles. That didn't sound medical enough, so about 100, 150 years ago, 150 years ago, they called it dying of old age. Well, then they decided that was too harsh, and so now it's called failure to thrive. Same thing, right? Exact same process. Exact same
I'm headed to
process.
failure to thrive.
It's just a matter of we change the language to describe the same thing that we're seeing, and that is people losing weight. Medically, it's defined as 10% of your body weight unintentionally over 6 months. But it's just people that are losing weight and losing strength for no other reason we can come up with. So in those situations, these are people that, you know, the failure to thrive, they can eat, they're just losing weight anyway, they're just not able to keep up. It's because their body's starting to shut down. With advanced dementia, at some point it affects your ability to swallow. But by the time it's gotten that far, it's gotten far enough that the body is starting to shut down. So these are both situations where it's not the person is dying because they're not eating. The person is not eating because they're dying. This is part of their shutting down process, and that's not just a day's process, that's a longer process sometimes. So, you know, it did make perfect sense when they said, okay, people with dementia stop eating, they can't swallow anymore, just like with a stroke, let's just put a feeding tube in their belly. We've done more than 50 studies on this worldwide now, and it doesn't help them put on good weight. You can fill them with enough fluid that they technically gain weight, but it's a bunch of water sitting in their legs and in their belly. It's not where you want it. It doesn't help strength, it doesn't help lean muscle, it doesn't help their quality of life, which I think is the big thing, but it also doesn't help them live any longer. And so in these situations, the National Geriatric Neurology and Internal Medicine Societies all recommend against feeding tubes, because we figured out all it is an extra intervention, an extra thing that you can cause complications with, but not something that actually helps people live better or live longer.
Are NG tubes still used?
Short term in the hospital, yes. Long term at home, no. So yeah, I
I
mean,
had one for 4 years,
she
Stroke.
and I hated it.
wow.
What did
I've
she
never
say?
heard about that. She asked if
NG
feeding tubes through the nose. So there's no, I mean, functionally, the tube in the nose goes into the stomach, the tube through the skin goes into the stomach. They function the same. We typically don't use one through the nose more than a couple of weeks because they're not usually too comfortable. They also cause sinus infection, nasal breakdown. So it's one where if you're, you know, you're on a life support machine, we got a tube in your throat to feed you a lot. Or you're in the hospital and we think something short term, rather than do a surgery, well, we'll just run a tube down a passage that's already there to feed you for a little bit, thinking we'll be able to get it out as you get back to eating. But I've never heard of somebody having one that long, so that surprises me. But I guess if you settled into it, it would eventually get to where it's just kind of like the feeding tube, where some people would do okay with it. So, and a little bit on advanced directives. So we've talked about what do I want as far as life support and some of that. What do I think about feeding tubes and nutrition? And this is where we get into a little bit more on the directives. So a living will is entirely different than a legal will, and I really wish they had different names. Everything on here is under the heading of advanced directive. So advanced directive is the broadest term to describe living wills, healthcare power of attorneys, other documents that talk about your wishes. But the legal will says, what do I want to happen to my money and my stuff after I go? The living will says, what do I want to happen to my body while I'm still alive, but as I'm getting sick. So it is somewhere where you can try to set some limits and kind of give some guidance. But as I mentioned answering a question earlier, a living will is a suggestion, not a rule. So it's not the strongest document, and it can still give some good guidance to people. But it's often something that we would like in conjunction with something else, like the healthcare power of attorney. So the healthcare power of attorney, Again, different than a legal power of attorney. Legal says I can do stuff with your bank and your property and all that. The healthcare power of attorney says I can make medical decisions for you. And that is only when someone gets to the point where they can't do it themselves. So if you have a healthcare power of attorney right now, and you're in this room talking, none of you guys are at a point where the healthcare power of attorney means anything. You guys are all calling your own shots. And if you go into the hospital, they should not be talking to your healthcare power of attorney about decisions, except to just include them in the conversation. They should be talking to you. So I've had to tell plenty of healthcare power of attorneys, yeah, you can't make that decision. I need to go ask the person in the bed because they're in their right mind. I need to see what they want to do. But if or when something would happen and you get sick enough you couldn't have that conversation anymore, this says, this is the person that I trust, that knows me, that I talk to try to make the decisions that I would make or to guide my health care from here. So it's a really powerful form. It doesn't have to be a family member. It can be a friend. It can be whoever you trust to make those medical decisions. I would say before you appoint the person, talk to them. I have called some healthcare power of attorneys that did not know they were the healthcare power of attorney. It's a little awkward sometimes. So have a conversation with them, make sure they're doing it, especially if it's not family and there is family, because I've done that too, and had to call somebody who's a friend and not the daughter or the husband, and none of them were aware who the healthcare power of attorney was. So,
And in the state of North Carolina, there is a hierarchy, a legal hierarchy. If you do not have this paperwork, who they have to go to, okay? So I had a situation where someone was not divorced, but they hadn't lived together in 30 years. In fact, they were living with other people.
Had not done a legal
No,
divorce.
but they hadn't had it. So they had to, the husband that was 30 years estranged had to make decisions. That's who the courts went to because they were still legally married. And in the state of North Carolina, your spouse is your number one. Yes, we've had a lot of interesting things.
So this person didn't relinquish? Did they?
Oh yeah, they did, but I mean,
Okay.
it's like you've got to know. You know, if you're not going to be divorced, then you need a medical. If you had a healthcare power of attorney, that's what I was. I said if you had a healthcare power of attorney, naming someone, then that's who they go to because that's the default. That's who they'll go to if you have the paper. Okay.
And who do they go to if you don't?
The spouse is the first one, and then it's the
children?
children, and it's the
Children and parents are on the same line. So it's the majority of children and parents second. Siblings is third. And then after that, it's anybody with an established relationship acting in good faith.
which we've had, like, they had no family whatsoever, and it's been, well, my landlord, you know, I mean, so.
But above all of those are a appointed guardian, a healthcare power of attorney. You know, before we get to the state where we're going to go through, the first step is, has somebody been appointed for you, or have you appointed somebody? And then if not, we have to go down there. If there's multiple on a line, if you've got 5 siblings, then it's majority rule, because you haven't appointed any of them.
Yeah,
So,
and it's
that
hard if you
pertains-
have like
Yep.
4 kids and 2 of them agree and 2 of them disagree.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you sometimes have to get ethics, the hospital ethics board in on this decision.
It can get
So,
messy.
can get messy. When a little piece of paper and a conversation could save you a big mess, so. All right.
Any other questions there before we go to the next one? Yeah. We're going to do just a little bit on hospice and palliative care. I think I just got one slide on each, but these are things that are commonly misunderstood, honestly, even in the medical community. I'm a palliative care doc, and I still don't think that a lot of docs that are out there really know exactly who we are or what we do. So palliate just means to ease or to relieve. So that's that talks about one of the big 2 roles. The palliative care really does 2 big categories, or 2 main roles. One is pain and symptom management. and that's all symptoms. So pain, nausea, depression, anxiety. One of my roles is I work in a cancer clinic, and my job there is to try to help people feel better while they're going through everything they're going through. So sometimes people come in 6, 7 different symptoms that I'm addressing on one visit. So it's really running the whole gamut of everything physical, psychological, emotional, and we're doing our best to try to address all of that. There's a lot that goes into somebody being sick. We have a multidisciplinary team, because when we get into some of the spiritual stuff and into some of the emotional stuff, I may not be the right person to address that. I'm only one person, and I trust my abilities on the medication side, but some of that other stuff, that is not where I'm strongest. So I've got teammates that are. So I've got a social worker that can really dig in on that side, and we've got a chaplain we work with. And so part of it is not trying to be a one-person army, but building a team that can address the different aspects of what's going on with somebody. And sometimes I'm the least important person on the team. Sometimes they really don't need me all that much, and sometimes they have a lot of symptoms on the physical side, and I'm kind of doing the lion's share of the work. But it's that team atmosphere is one thing that sets palliative care apart from some of the other groups. But part of along with the symptom management side, the other big thing we do is what we call goals of care. It's helping guide people that are trying to make tough decisions. Do I want, I got this big surgery coming up, or do I want this next round of chemotherapy, or do I want CPR, or whatever happens to be weighing on them. And making sure that we sit down, talk about all the nuances, answer their questions, make sure they have the information to make the right decision for them. And then communicate that to the rest, help communicate that to the rest of the medical team, and make sure we're building the whole medical plan going the direction that they want to go. So the symptom management side and the conversation side are the two big things that the palliative care team does. There are no limits on who we can see. There's no age limit, there's no diagnosis limit, there's no you have to be this sick limit. There's simply a matter of, do you have a need in one of those other categories? And if you do, we can see it. And this is often given alongside curative treatment. As I mentioned, I'm in the cancer clinic. These are people that are really, a lot of these are really hoping to cure the cancer or to be as aggressive as possible to buy as much time as we can. So we're not on the going towards hospice side, we're on the fighting this as hard as we can side, and I'm there in the trenches with them, trying to help keep them feeling well enough and strong enough to keep doing the treatments and the things that they want to do. Next slide. Hospice is your care of patients with a terminal diagnosis, which is, for the hospice criteria in America, you have to have 2 different doctors certify that you're probably looking at 6 months or less. That's why you hear the number of 6 months so much when you're talking to doctors. Because they'll say less than 6 months sometimes, even if they think it's less than a month. But their brain is trained to think, is it time for hospice or is it not? So the 6 month mark is kind of ingrained, and so that's why you hear a doctor giving somebody 6 months so often. The patient also has to have decided they do not want aggressive treatments anymore. So they're not treating their cancer anymore. They're not doing dialysis for their kidneys. They've made some decisions to say, I don't want this aggressive stuff anymore. I just want to go home with my family and be comfortable. Most hospice is done in the home, 95%. Where a lot of times when you say hospice, people think the place you go.
I'm going to go to the hospice.
You go to the hospice. I don't want to go to the hospice. I want to be at home. Most hospice comes to you, and that's nursing home, apartment, assisted living, wherever.
Hotels.
Hospice actually takes care of homeless people on a fairly regular basis, and kind of has to strategically figure out where to meet them to take care of them. But their job is a lot of times their job is, I want to be at home. I don't want to go somewhere else. And hospice is trying to kind of bridge what gaps we can in order to keep them there. So most of that care is actually done at home. Two quick misconceptions. One is, when people think hospice, they think, they're just going to stop all my medicine, and then I'm going to die. So there's that tiny kernel of truth that's in a lot of misconceptions, right? So when you go under hospice, it's like looking at that food and nutrition at the end. You do have to change your perspective just a little bit. So all of a sudden that cholesterol medicine, which helps people over a decade or two, if you've got 3 weeks to live, it's not helping. So that's one less thing that you have to take every day. Is some of your medicines that they look through, your blood sugar can run a little higher. Maybe we can be a little bit more conservative with that. Your blood pressure can run a little higher. Some people actually feel better with a blood pressure of 150 than they do 120. Now, if you've got 20 or 30 years to live, we want it lower so you don't have a stroke. If you've got a couple of weeks or a couple of months, it running a little higher and you feeling better is probably more important. So they do look at everything and say, does this still make sense? Because in the medical community, we'll put somebody on something they should have been on for 6 months and they'll be on it 20 years later. Because it's not hurting anything and nobody ever really looked at that to say, do we still need that? So some of what they pull off honestly should have been pulled off 10 years ago if we had been looking at things right. Some of the things just don't make sense anymore based on where we are now that would have made sense if the prognosis was a little bit different. But if you've got bad lungs, they're not going to stop your inhalers. Because if you do, you're going to have a lot of symptoms and they're going to have to be scrambling to control those. They stop your heart meds, your heart's going to tip over, you're going to be short of breath, they're going to be constantly trying to work to get that back under control. So anything that's stabilizing the system and also often helps you feel better. And their goal is quality of life. That's really what hospice is about. It's about living every day the best you can. So going in and stopping a bunch of medicines that's helping people feel good and be able to kind of stay balanced is not what they're looking for.
And it's an underutilized Medicare benefit that it's just there's just a lot of misconceptions with what hospice is. Now there are for-profit and non-profit, and but.
So the other big misconception we hear is that they're just going to come in and drug you until you die. I mean, I'd be surprised if most of you haven't heard that at some point. That, again, is one of those where there's a little bit there, but I think a little bit more stretch. So hospice in the home does not administer medications outside of pretty rare circumstances. They prescribe a med that the person takes if they need it, or the family gives them if they want it. But the person keeps control as long as they're able. The family takes over when they're not. The only time hospice is administering meds in the home is when something has gone so wrong and they're in crisis and they're having to give injections and do something to try to keep somebody from having to go somewhere that they don't want to be. But they're not going to just come in and, hey, how you doing today? There's your medicine, whether or not you want it. That's actually assault because you can't give somebody a medication that they didn't agree to.
And morphine. They're going to give them the morphine in that. Morphine, opioids are the gold standard for shortness of breath. Okay, when we're looking at, not even just end of life, but in palliative, like when I worked with a palliative physician in the outpatient setting, and he's working with a heart failure patient, 5 milligrams of oxycodone just took the edge off that shortness of breath. I mean, it's marvelous for shortness of breath.
So morphine actually is the very same family as oxycodone, hydrocodone, Vicodin, that kind of stuff. My son broke his arm falling off a horse about 1.5 years ago. He was 5. He got morphine in the emergency room. If it was a dangerous end-of-life drug, would they have given it to a 5-year-old? Dilaudid and oxycodone have twice as many unintentional deaths per year compared to morphine. Fentanyl now has the most. So if you look at your major drugs, the only one that has less unintentional deaths is hydrocodone. Hydrocodone, then morphine, then then Dilaudid, then oxycodone, then fentanyl. Part of that is abuse and some of that kind of stuff on the street, but even for medical deaths, it's below oxycodone and Dilaudid. So morphine is not nearly as dangerous as people think, and honestly, oxycodone and Dilaudid versus morphine are kind of like Pepsi versus Coke. They're the exact same thing practically, they're just a slightly different version. And all of them can be useful for shortness of breath and some of the symptoms that we see around end of life. The reason people think morphine is it's cheaper than the other ones. That's kind of how it became the standard. So these men, the drugging until they die, there's a lot of misconceptions there about people just coming in, they're going to push you over the edge. I've also been asked to do that. I have been asked, I am ready to go, can you just come give me that shot that hospice does? And I have to tell people, that's called euthanasia, that's not something we can do.
It's not legal.
That is not something we can do. And I've had patients and families get pretty mad. Like that's what I thought we were doing here. So sometimes people sign up for it or don't sign up for it because they're scared of it. Some people sign up thinking that's what they're getting. They're getting that ability to call their shot and say, when's their time, and I have to explain, we can't do that either. But
With hospice, Randy had said, two doctors have to say that, they're in the last, they wouldn't be surprised if they passed away in the next 6 months. And that's just the standard in order to use the Medicare benefit. But I had heart failure patients on my service with hospice for years, because they were still declining, okay? So it's not and then I've had occasionally heart failure patients or COPD patients that we had to discharge from hospice because they got better. It doesn't mean we can't get them back at a later time. So there's a lot of misconceptions to actually take it when it's offered and use it to the fullest, because there's only one person that knows when that person is going, in my opinion.
And just backing that up a little bit, we now have 7 research studies with different conditions, 4 of them are cancer. The people that end up deciding to do hospice live longer than those that stay on aggressive care. So that's a huge,
And feel better.
not only does hospice not shorten life, we now have some pretty solid research that's evolved over the last really 5 years or so that they've really dug into this. They live longer. The thought process is, at some point, if the medical treatment isn't helping, you're still getting side effects. So chemo is the perfect example, although they've done some stuff with hearts and lungs too, but most of this that I'm thinking of is cancer. If your cancer doesn't respond, your body takes a beating from the chemo either way. So if you continue giving chemotherapy that's less and less likely to work, then all you're doing is weakening the body. Versus if you just let things alone, then people feel better because they don't have all the symptoms of chemo, but they actually end up living longer. So there's a groundbreaking study for palliative care that early palliative care actually improves survival as much as the second line of chemotherapy did. So some of these things that we do to help the body feel better, to take the edge off symptoms, to support people, keep them stronger, keep them feeling better, also helps them do better for longer. So there isn't always, it's not always, well, I gotta stop everything and it's a sacrifice. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you actually get benefits in a couple of different areas from some of these decisions.
We're gonna wrap up, guys. But
So I get asked a lot about the relationship between palliative and hospice. So palliative is the giant big umbrella, with hospice being one thing under it. Everything hospice does is under the palliative umbrella, but an awful lot of palliative care has nothing to do with hospice. Next slide. That's kind of the rest of palliative care. So hospice is one aspect of what we're doing, but the making decisions, the symptoms, the upstream talks, the communication side, there's a lot of stuff that we're doing there that has nothing whatsoever to do with hospice. And hospice is an important part of what some people need and what we talk about sometimes, depending on where somebody is in their trajectory.
come in and talk, if you talk to me about your health care, and I kind of, walk with you through that, we do some paperwork, whatever, I'm providing palliative care. I'm easing your comfort, easing your mind, so.
Alright, so this is where we're just going to transition into questions again. I know we've been stopping a little bit along the way, but there's another good pause. Any questions right now?
You take care of palliative care in Winston-Salem. Do we have that care in Salisbury or Concord?
Yes.
We do.
Yeah, Atrium is going to be your big provider on actually both inpatient and outside. I worked for Atrium before I worked for Novant. So I ran the program at Northeast for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, something like
So
that.
it is there.
Yeah, they got a great program, still got a lot of friends there.
That's inpatient. Now, outpatient just recently started within Atrium, probably back in 2014, and they were specific to diseases initially. End-stage liver, end-stage heart failure, and then COPD. So you could get, if the physician could, do a consult with palliative. What I found with working with Dr. Kravitsky is that the family or the patient would go, palliative, and just start bawling their eyes out, where they just didn't realize this is going to help you. This is going to help you with your symptoms. This is going to help you plan, because we know we start here, we end here. And we know if we have like diabetes, or we have heart failure, it's like this: exacerbations, and then you get better. and exacerbations, and then you get better. But you never quite get back to here because we're not meant to live forever. So, and you don't get rid of heart failure. You can manage it extremely well for years, decades. But knowing what it's going to look like helps you make informed decisions about your care. And that's what this boiled down to, was, you know, it should be your decision. It shouldn't be the physician. It shouldn't be the ER staff. It should be your decision, what type of care you want or don't want. So I hope that y'all aren't disappointed this wasn't just filling out paperwork. But I am happy to do any healthcare power of attorney and living wills with anybody. I'm a notary, I can do it, I can help explain it, and I'm happy to do that. Any questions?
Well, I do, because I ran across this situation recently where I spoke to, I was taking care of my aunt, and I spoke to her primary doctor, and I said, don't you think it's time for palliative care? Because I could see the writing on the wall. And, oh, no, we're nowhere near that. So I felt like I was blocked. Because I felt like she needed to be there, or probably hospice. But I didn't know who to turn to at that point until she went into the hospital. And that's when Mary Ann was wonderful. But so my question is, if I face that again in a doctor's office with the primary doctor who said, no. But he sees her for 5 minutes. I see her every day. I've seen her lab work. I've seen her just decline. How do I get palliative involved in the care before it gets to the hospice point?
Yeah. So there's a couple of options there. One is, and you shouldn't have to, but reality is you might. You gotta remind the doctor, I'm not talking about hospice, I'm talking about palliative. I thought they could be involved any time.
Right.
Reset their brain a little bit to say, oh yeah, palliative, that can be more upstream, or see if that would be enough. Other thing is you can cold call an outpatient, you can cold call palliative care. They can't sign you up without a doctor's order, but they can come do their own evaluation and talk to you and say, does this make sense? And then when that team says, hey, family contacted us and I look, and actually they meet hospice criteria because of A, B, and C, or, you know, I agree with you, they don't meet hospice criteria, but I think we could help them doing palliative by A, B, or C. All the doctors say is, yeah, that's fine, and they're done. And they've got the order that they need. So you can, yeah, we've had some people that have done that just go straight to the group to do a kind of an not unofficial, because I mean they are officially involved, but do a visit before enrollment just as an assessment to say, does this person qualify, or what services would this person qualify for?
You know, I mean, physicians, I mean, they're trained to fix, to heal, to fix, and that's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, you know.
It's harder on the patient.
It is, but that's where you have to have an advocate, a strong advocate, and to know what is available. I mean, I am happy to work with anyone here to guide them in the direction.
I just never had faced that, at taking care of people where I had a doctor who's, no, that's, she's not anywhere close to ready for that. And I'm like,
because
have
they
you seen
think
her
it's
records?
hospice.
I mean, if you looked at her chart.
And physicians are 5 times more likely to overestimate than underestimate prognosis. And the better they are, the worse they are at being accurate.
Wow.
They let their bias get to them. They want you to do better, so they find reasons to think you're going to do better. So a doctor you met in the hospital that doesn't know you at all is actually going to give you a better prognosis than the doctor that's been following you for 30 years. Should be the opposite, because the doctor that knows you for 30 years knows you a whole lot better, but you get it. Once that emotional side gets in there, that all of that knowledge kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. Just like if you're medical, but you have a family member sick, the medical side goes out the window, and you're just there as their son. And so it's kind of the same thing where you. Unfortunately, it's not unfortunate. Doctors are human too, and they've got they're gonna have their own biases, and sometimes you can reset that a little bit by asking the right questions or by doing a little bit of an in-runaround. It's unfortunate people have to, but it is the reality of the healthcare system.
Thank you.
Alright, I got time for one more question, and then I had a schedule change. I was supposed to be free for the rest of the night, but I gotta go pick up my daughter from softball in Harrisburg. So,
We need to get you out of here.
I got a little bit of a haul. Anybody want a last question? Otherwise, you guys still got time to talk to her about
Thank
stuff.
you for coming.
Thank you.
One more question, and I'm gonna run one more slide. Oh. Good. So, yeah, we'll go back one. So, yeah, this is one of our frequent asked questions that we put in here because I thought it was important. Anybody in here that has ever had a conversation or been around where somebody said that they want everything? If they get sick, they want everything.
Yeah.
So we hear this a lot.
I want everything.
So
Do it all.
what does that mean, right? So when somebody says they want everything, next slide, because this is what everything looks like. From a medical standpoint, what everything means is not just the short-term CPR shocks life support. It's keeping somebody alive on a machine as long as you possibly can. So it's doing a surgery to put the breathing tube in their throat. It's doing a surgery to put a feeding tube in the belly. It's leaving them on a machine. If you can't get them off, then you leave them on indefinitely. And for most people, that means every once in a while, insurance and family situation is such that you can actually get that person home. That's rare. Most people end up in a long-term vet facility. They're
Another
pretty rare.
city.
Yeah.
in
I don't.
another
I
county.
think, and I haven't looked recently, but I think last time I looked, the closest one is towards Winston, and after that, you're looking closer to the coast.
There's still one in Greensboro.
But there's area-ish, but they're few and they're far, and so I don't. Probably one in the last 6 or 7 that I can think of that we've kept in state. All the other we've sent people to Ohio, Florida, Atlanta. You go where there's a bed because there's not very many beds, and when you get one, you gotta take it. And so then the family is either looking at not seeing this person pretty much ever, or moving so that they can live close to this person. So it's a big step. And the person's living, attached to a machine, in bed, doing little for themselves. Some of them mentally there, some of them not so much. What everything is, to me, is everything is usually an unfinished sentence. It's kind of a cliffhanger. You need somebody to finish the thought. Because most people would consider that a fate worse than death. That is people's biggest fear. So while some people would be okay with it, for most we know that's not what they want. And so even people that say everything, this usually isn't what they're talking about. What they want is everything to get better. They want everything to get back home with their family. They want everything to get on their feet again. They don't mean every heartbeat, no matter what, even if they aren't even aware that they're having a heartbeat. So if you are ever part of this conversation, someone says, well, if I get sick, I want everything, I would recommend clarifying that. Because I would say for me, less than 10% of people that say they want everything when I clarify actually mean it. And a lot of them end up setting much stronger limits than you'd think based off of that first comment that they make. Problem is, a lot of people don't clarify, even medically. You ask somebody what they want, which is, if I want sick, I want everything. That gets in the medical record, and then not only have they told the doctor that, we didn't tell the family. When I talked to them about this, they said they wanted everything. And family says, well, I've never talked to them about it. If that's what they said, and we get on this road where it very well may not have been what they actually wanted, but we listened to what they said. It's another one of those, we know what everything means to us, they know what everything means to them, we may not be speaking the same language. So we just need to clarify and make sure that we really are signing them up for what they actually thought they were signing up for. All right, I'm gonna run away.
See you later. Be safe.
And if anybody wants papers done or wants to meet with me or whatever, I got paper here to write your questions in.
Do we need to have the person that, for instance, if we want our child, do they need to sign the form?
No,
Okay.
they do not need to sign the form. The only thing is, and what I have put in here, it used to be, well, the state form for healthcare power of attorney and for living will, both of them are 10 pages long.
Okay.
And they're full of legalese. So several years ago, they made a form, the lawyers got together and they made a simplified form for North Carolina. And I fought tooth and nail at Atrium because they were still using the 10-page. And I mean, I had to go to jump these hoops and go to all sorts of meetings to get us, because Presbyterian Novant was using the short form, you know. So as of 2015, Atrium's been using the short form. That is what is in your folder. It is a living will, which if you don't want to fill that out, you just put a line through it. And then it is a healthcare power of attorney. There's 5 sheets, you keep them all together.
Gotcha.
Okay? And what I would recommend, if you want to name your child, I would recommend telling them exactly what you want.
Right.
And that you're going to name them as their
Right.
healthcare power of attorney.
Right.
In the state of North Carolina, it needs a notary and it needs 2 witnesses. They cannot be related to you or stand to prosper off of
Right.
you, that sort of thing. So,
But in the
anyway.
case of listing your child, how's that child, well, you need to tell the child where the paperwork is, but
well, here's what I would suggest. If you're gonna, I would make copies of my healthcare power of attorney and my living will. I would send them to who I talk to. I would also take them to my doctors and have them scan them into my medical record and let them know that you have advance directives, you brought them and you want them scanned in your medical record. Now, Deb brought up a good point about the most form, the DNR, okay, the goldenrod or the hot pink one, the most form. Those have to be that particular form. They cannot be copies. But with my most form that I have, I made several hot pink copies. And I put one in my office, one in my glove compartment, and I gave the doctor the original to scan into my chart. And then I've got the original at home. So I'm just covering myself. I'm protecting myself, okay? I don't think you can't have enough conversations. And to revisit it, I've gone and worked with people who their healthcare power of attorney has passed away. And I'm like, well, your husband died 5 years ago, but how is he going to make decisions for you? So I recommend, if you have it already, look over it, review it, see if it's still applicable, see if it's still the same person. If not, change it. You know, I mean. Yes.
Can you have more than one person there in case one
You
gets
can,
sick?
but then you're going to run into some issues with, do those 2 people agree? Do they not agree?
I'd come back to home.
Well, then don't name them.
Where do you get the golden?
The goldenrod, okay. So I have some in my office, okay. I also have some most forms, but your doctor should have the goldenrods. Some of them don't have the most forms. If your doctor doesn't have it, I will get one for you.
Is it simplified like these, or is it?
No, the goldenrod is simply, it just says, do not attempt resuscitation. It has it's
It's
golden
strictly
color.
about resuscitation.
It is got a stop sign on it. The doctor signs it. That has to be a physician, a nurse practitioner, or a PA that has to sign that, okay? Whereas your healthcare power of attorney, your living will, 2 witnesses and a notary.
Gotcha.
So the most form, which is a DNR plus, and then the goldenrod, which is just a DNR. Those 2 are medical orders a doctor or advanced practice need to sign. Those are ones that you should get at your doctor's office and talk to them about it. If you run into trouble, I'll get you a form and I'll get Randy to come and sign it for you. Because, you know, I mean, I think it should be your choice. If that's what you want, it should be your choice. So I hope this was educational. I hope that you guys learned a lot. I'm very passionate about this subject.
And we really appreciate hearing from you on Grandma.
Yeah.
The thing that is so wonderful is knowing that when you've got a close family like that, that entrance into heaven is magical.
Yes.
It
It's
can
magical.
be, end of life can be so intimate and precious.
Yes.
It can be so intimate and precious.
Yes.
And that was honestly, I have been at hundreds of deaths.
Right.
That was probably the most,
Right.
I can't believe her daughter came. This is just, we were all laying on the bed singing
Yeah.
softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, and she took her last breath. I mean, it was just an honor. It
Yeah.
was an honor. Everybody pulled together. She wanted to be home, but the thing that meant the most to me was that last day that she was responsive, and she just looked at me and said, man, I'm glad I made the choice I made.
Right.
She said, it's been great.
Right.
She was loving the attention, boy,
Right.
let me tell you. The people coming over, the food,
I think that was a big thing for her is visitors, you know, having her people around was huge. And if she had been in the hospital, only one person at a
That's
time.
right.
would
Yeah,
be able to
particularly
be there.
this
And
last couple of
chemo,
years.
she was immunocompromised, so, you know, it's like who could be there.
She
for
could
her to
have
have-
the family with her.
Yeah.
Oh, Valentine's Day, I think it was, she had a group of 5
The
or
card
6
ladies arranged that.
quartet come in with suits and red ties, and they sang some like old-timey song.
Yeah, you are my sunshine.
I mean,
Let me call you sweetheart.
yeah, and she was like, just sitting in her chair, just like, you know, I mean, it was wonderful, wonderful.
And she was home. She was
Yeah.
home. You know.
And thank you for sharing that with us.
Mary Ann, would you speak briefly on a patient at the end of life, how they are still there, they still hear, and they know people are there with them, even though they can't respond? How,
I don't know that I can speak on like research wise,
no, well,
but
But it's your
just
experience.
in my experience, because I have been at hundreds and hundreds of deaths, I think they still hear.
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely believe they still hear. I also know that there's certain things that are gonna happen. You're gonna have terminal agitation
right.
and restlessness, and you're gonna do this, and you might do this, right? And I have seen people go, what do you know, and I'm like, I've been at too many that they're, I think they see,
Yes.
that's me personally, I think they see Jesus and they're reaching, and he's saying, come on.
Well, I mean, like the families, the people that come to see them, they're afraid to say anything. I'm like, just talk to them. Just talk to them like you would if you were on the phone or if you were there to visit.
You know, it just depends on how you were raised, and I mean, so, cause some people, honestly, I could have this conversation and some people go, I don't wanna hear it, you know, but that's their choice,
Yeah.
that's their choice, you know. I've worked with a lot of people that their choice would not have been my choice, you know.
yeah.
I started in med-surg ICU and I quickly decided this isn't for me, you know, so, just passionate. I am so passionate about this subject.
And we appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann.